Impacting lives, building leaders all around the world. Let us keep our dreams alive. Cause tomorrow's gonna be a better day.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our new episode of Cocktail Youth Network podcast. So, in this episode, while the title of the episode is Living Through War, our Ukrainian youth speaks out, where we amplify voices from across the world. I'm your host, Nabila Abbas, and today we have a very special guest, Artur, a young voice from Ukraine. As we continue our mission to bring first-hand stories from regions affected by war, Arthur will help us understand what life is like for youth in Ukraine amidst ongoing challenges. So, welcome, Arthur, to our new episode in the Cocktail World Youth Network. I welcome to you, and I would like you to introduce yourself to the audience.
First of all, thanks for having me. I am coming back to Cocktail podcast. This is my second time here. And of course, many things have changed during that gap. So thank you so much for having me once again. My name is Artur. I can be whatever you want for everyone. I am from Ukraine, but since 2022, I am located in Poland for my studies. Currently, I am a student at the College of Europe in Netherlands. At the same time, I'm the analyst at the Detector Media NGO, which is the Ukrainian top media watchdog. Also, I am the Global Responsibility Day campaign ambassador in Poland. And together with that, I am also collaborating, working with many other youth initiatives, both from Ukraine and abroad. I think when we talk about other activities that I'm doing, I'm also given commentary on various issues related to U.S. politics, European politics, and security issues to various media outlets, both Ukrainian and foreign. And I have the experience of working at various think tanks and having internships at various diplomatic and political institutions, including the Canadian Parliament and the Ukrainian Embassy in the United States.
Thank you very much, Arthur. And of course, welcome back to Cocktail. We are so glad to have you once again. And this is so amazing to know about your work, like marvelous work you have been doing, so much efforts you are putting back to your country as well, while participating at different international platform as well. So I believe like this is your core strength. Keep it up with that as well. So for our very, common, maybe like very general audience, Arthur, let us start with an overview. Can you give us a brief insight into the current situation in Ukraine? What are the key developments on the ground, especially for those like maybe for some newcomers listener?
That's a very good question, because I understand that for audiences outside of Ukraine, no matter where it is, Europe, Latin America, Asia, Africa, North America, the war has muted down a little bit in comparison with other geopolitical developments. But also, I think it's important to understand and know that the war in Ukraine is still going on. And I think the most important development and the most important highlight in the context of recent developments is the fact that there was the idea implemented and offered by Donald Trump about the ceasefire. And Russia is constantly violating the conditions of that ceasefire. For example, during the last 2 weeks, we had big attacks on the civilian infrastructure perpetrated by Russian forces against people in such towns and cities as Kryvyi Rih and Sumy. Specifically, the Sumy attack happened to be during one of the most important religious holidays for Ukrainians, which is a part of Easter holidays group. And the point is that these attacks were very well reported both in Ukraine and abroad, but at the same time, there are also attacks that are underreported that are happening in between or after those two major developments. For example, the whole Sumy region is currently heavily shelled, heavily attacked, and it's underreported in comparison with other developments. Of course, the situation has been very dynamic, and the modern warfare is very complex, and it's going beyond the traditional warfare methods. So, of course, we're talking about the hybrid warfare, we're talking about disinformation, we're talking about many other things and instances, excuse me, where Russia is trying to both justify and continue its aggression against Ukraine. For instance, we are talking about the disinformation campaigns that are constant. And we are also talking about all these other matters. So I think for people, these recent developments are the most important to know regarding that. But also at the same time, it's important to understand that because of the modern world and how it's built, Ukraine is trying to move on. Ukraine is trying to live on and trying to adapt its everyday activities to those conditions. And basically, the economy should be kept alive, and also all other avenues of everyday life, because the war is a huge mental toll for people. So it's really important to understand that together with the war conditions, the country is trying to move on, is trying to do reforms, it's trying to live that new normal. However, nobody knows when this new normal will end. And of course, the general public seems to be naturally tired and naturally fatigued by all these developments and very frustrated about not knowing how and when this will end, and not knowing whether this will ever end.
Of course, this is so devastating, even to hear like whatever you have been explaining so far about the situation in Ukraine. And also you have said it very well. Like we as general audience have also been listening and watching through different news channels. And this is true, like Russia is constantly, violating the deal for ceasefire, which is, of course, a deal for the peace, for the future peace, for the development of humanity as well. So, like, how is life of people in Ukraine? How much they are affected? As you already have mentioned, few of the points, like where you said this is a mental torture for the people, and of course, they are now tired of this situation as well. So, how a normal day looks like in Ukraine?
That's a very good question. It's also important to understand that there's a huge difference of experiences for those Ukrainians who live abroad and for those who are stay in the country. And my experience is completely different of those, and I cannot speak up for all Ukrainians because I know that there are people who suffered much, much, much more than me. But I will try to do this some justice and will try to portray this as accurate as possible. The first thing to know about all of that is that the exact conditions that people are living under in that context depend on the region where these people live. Because, for example, when we talk about the east of the country and some southern parts of it and some northern parts of it, we really have to understand that these regions have been under the constant shelling, under very, very, very dramatic conditions. And there are some villages there and towns there that have no access to basic services and who struggle to cope with everyday life. Meanwhile, when we talk about the western regions, or for example, the capital city or the central regions, the situation is different because there's less shelling. And basically now they are the lifeline of the country's economy. When we talk about the capital city specifically, it's a whole another situation because the capital city has been shelled quite frequently in comparison with the western regions. However, as it is the capital city, it has to keep the life going. It has to adapt to all these processes. So I think it's very also good to know that for the most part, it's really difficult to plan something with such conditions because you can have a planned out day, but for example, the attack could disrupt any of those plans. And I know from my colleagues who are physically in Ukraine that they have trouble sleeping because a major part of the attacks is happening during the night, especially during the sleep time. So people have issues with their sleep. Of course, it's also about the whole process of sheltering yourself from those. Because, for example, some people are going to the shelters that are in the basements of the apartment complexes. But for example, some people would just stay in the bathroom and would just continue doing something from the bathroom. There are many videos and there's a lot of stuff in the internet that is showing the direct experience of those people. But I think that it's kind of answering the question in the best way possible that there's no particular schedule right now for Ukrainians because you cannot plan anything. So even if you plan something out, this can be tossed into the bin because of the attack. And I think that's what forced many enterprises, many people, many professionals in the country to adapt their work culture a little bit. Because now, for example, for 99% of people staying in Ukraine, when the attack is happening, that means that you have either to go to bathroom or to the shelter. And nothing else matters in that regard. So I think that's the best way to describe it. And I think the biggest mental impact that this whole situation has is that uncertainty, that you never know what will happen and that you cannot live your life to the fullest because you always have a feeling that something is wrong and that soon something will happen. And people underestimate the effect of that because it happens a lot even to people who are not living through the war because of how uncertain the modern world is and how its various developments are messed up honestly speaking. However, in that case, it's even more amplified and more highlighted because of the real danger behind it. Like, for example, Ukraine has huge issues with the mined territories, and it has a lot to put into the demining efforts because basically people, for example, cannot collect crops, cannot do gardening, cannot simply live on the territories that are mined because you never know when it will blow up. And I think that is really important to understand and not to expect some particular answers, because I think even Ukrainians are not that aware of those particular answers, to be honest, because I think it's like walking with no light. Like you're trying to navigate all of that, but you don't really know what you're doing to some extent because this is happening to you for the first time ever. And that particular kind of war, with all these drone developments, with that much of the hybrid warfare impact, this is unprecedented. So, of course, now Ukrainians are, in that case, very unfortunately, but trendsetters in some sort of way in terms of how to deal with that and I think Ukrainians understand the flexibility in the new whole way now.
Thank you very much, Arthur, for explaining the emotions of people and the mental health of people of the Ukraine. In so many ways, you have described it very well, and of course, it makes us very shocked sometime while listening some of the facts, being living in a war zone area, like how much harmful it can be, how much dangerous it can be sometimes. And you said it very well, like sometimes like people do have plan, but of course any plan can be interrupted by such, war activity by the Russia. And I think that is not normal, of course. We cannot say like it is a normal life. And you are a part of a young generation that has witnessed immense changes in Ukraine. You also have put some of the examples of your fellows, friends. So, how do young people in Ukraine perceive their future?
That's a very complex question because I think that the context of the war is really depressing, especially for those youngsters who are directly affected by it. We also have to remember that Russia, unfortunately, has abducted many children and is trying to re-educate them and erase their Ukrainian identity completely. So when, for example, there are cases of those kids who were returned by Ukraine from that particular situation, their level of frustration is uncomparable because something they've experienced is a new level of evil. Let's call it like that. But of course, even by the fact that some of them are sharing those testimonies, are sharing those thoughts and telling their stories, I think that is the big indicator of them believing in the good future of that country, believing that all of that sacrifice was worth it. And I think for many youngsters, no matter if they are located abroad at that moment, or, for example, if they are already in Ukraine, talking to many young people amidst various projects, I think that you can definitely see that they want to build new Ukraine. You can see a lot of desire to do that and a lot of capacity to do that. The only question is whether the youth will be given that opportunity in the future. Because I understand that my country has been going through a lot at that moment, but as a young person myself, sometimes it's really frustrating to see some ageism against young people exercised during the recruitment process in, for example, some institutions or international organizations or also governmental institutions. Like the excuse of being too young for something is more frequent, unfortunately, in such entities that we think. And it's so saddening for me because, with no disrespect to those people who are working currently in those institutions, and of course, with the biggest possible admiration to all the context and all the difficulties and intricacies of the conditions that we work in with and their life experience, I know at least 5 people who are younger, but who could do their job better. And I think this is the biggest indicator, and this is the most important indicator in that case. Not those excuses about 5 diplomas, 5 degrees, 20 years of life experience, or something like that. It's about the professional competencies. Because, for example, I have 7 internships and I'm 25. And I know some people in the diplomatic service who have much less experience, but they do have those jobs because they are 35 plus. And I would not be allowed into their position because I am too young. I lack life experience, as they say. But what is life experience? Isn't it something that is very individual? Like, for example, a person who's 15 years old can have tons more life experience than me, and that's fine. And I think the whole philosophy of that thing should change, and the whole philosophy behind that should also change. The youth should be given a good standard. It should be taken seriously because, for example, now there's this tendency in Ukraine, especially for ministries, to create these so-called youth councils. Almost every ministry in Ukraine has those. However, the point is that in the marketing perspective, it sounds cool because it's always been framed as, oh, we are giving youth the opportunity to have the impact on important things. But when you really go deeper and when you see what these people are doing, for the most of the time, they're having a very limited capacity. They are either doing some social media campaigns or, I don't know, some exhibitions or something like that. And of course, it's very important. But at the same time, what about the policymaking process? What about the consultations? Youth is not only about the social media, it's not only about discarding something that you don't think you can do well and just, giving that to the youth. Because youth is allegedly better at technologies than some other generation. Well, the point is to really give youth that chance to have a real impact, to include youngsters to the policymaking process. And I know that some people will tell me that, well, we have some youngsters, they are giving us advice, they're giving us consultations, we are taking that into account. You don't have to talk about that this way because we really do that. Something you say is a lie. But there comes another challenge, and it's about equality and equity. Because, yes, there are some youngsters in Ukraine who are having that platform who are working at those ministries, working at those other entities, and who are given those consultations. However, the biggest difference between me and those people, and by me, in that case, I also mean people who I know personally, we have the big gap in terms of the connections, because those youngsters who are in the ministries and they're having that platform, they are either from wealthy families, which is a huge jumping point in the career, or they have right connections, not because of their networking or professional capacities. And this is the big issue that we have, and we don't have to shy away from it, because people from wealthier families, they may not be necessarily that bad in their job, but they definitely have more opportunities in their life to be better. They have more opportunities to go study abroad. They have access to better schools. They have access to better resources. And of course, when we, for example, take my CV with my experience, but without those connections and those wealthy families, so meaning no Harvard, no Oxford, no whatever else is like super prestigious, and another person who might be, for example, speaking English worse or having less of the working experience, but on paper in the CV, this person would look better because this person has Harvard, or Oxford, or whatever other Ivory League, higher education institution. And also it will have internships at better placements because of that. Because before the law has been adapted in the European Union about the requirement to pay for internships, most of the internships at the biggest institutions were unpaid, and they are still unpaid by such institutions as the UN, for example, in New York, or some embassies of some countries. So meaning you can have that internship only if you can afford the cost of living there. And there is a huge difference of living cost in Warsaw, for example, and in Vienna, or in Warsaw and New York. And of course, somebody who has the internship at the UN mission in New York will be better looking on paper than somebody who had an internship in Warsaw, of course. But nobody will be talking about how the person could afford that. And that's how we have that. So I want to tell all of this to show that there is a lot of optimism, a lot of energy, and a lot of knowledge and competencies in Ukrainian youth. However, I don't want this moment to be wasted. I don't want all of that to be wasted for some nonsense. So I hope that somebody will listen to that podcast and will take that into account and will make sure that the youth will not be put on the sidelines. It will be doing some Instagram reels for something or whatever. The young people would actually be involved in these important processes, because we need that. The world is different now. You cannot, unfortunately, have the efficient and good governance nowadays without having the youth perspective, because the world is too dynamic, too fast, and at times too ambitious nowadays. And we have a very ambitious goal, and we have a very ambitious target that we need to achieve, which is reconstruction and recovery of Ukraine. Because if we would not do this fast enough, I don't know what will happen. And young people should be involved in in these processes, because reconstruction and recovery is also about the capacity building. It's about the institutional capacity. It's about the soft security, and it's about resilience.
Yeah, thank you very much, Arthur. I mean, there are so many points which you have described in a very, accurate way, and emphasizing on the importance of inclusivity, equity, and equality of youth participating in different social, economic, and political affairs. And you said it very right when you said, like, sometimes they say, like, we have taken youth consultation in notice, but in practical terms, they are not allowed to participate into, you know, in authoritative level when it comes to some practical actions. So I totally agree with that like, I think most of the time around the globe, many youth people from different countries have been facing the same issue, that they do not get the right opportunity at the right time. So I think uh, like this was a very, very um, productive answer, which has so many issues you just described, and I think our audience would have been listening to these issues, and they might relate with many of these. So coming back to the Ukrainian youth, are there any specific initiatives or movements led by youth to support their communities or contribute to the nation's resilience?
Yes, there are. And I'm so glad that the previous answer resonated with you also so well, because as you said correctly, I think this is not the isolated case of one country. But coming back to the new question, the civil society network in Ukraine is very robust. It's very dynamic. There are so many different organizations. And actually, of course, there are some different, situations that are different views on some processes and etc. However, in times of crisis, you could really see that mobilization of efforts in the civil society. And I know many incredible projects that contribute to the country's resilience in general. I would like to use that opportunity to mention that I know that some people all across the globe are reading all those news about, USA projects, and they are like, oh my God, the countries were spending money on something like, I don't know, theater play in Lithuania, or I don't know, horse riding in Mongolia or something like that, and it's not needed, it's ridiculous, blah blah blah, and all of that. But actually, not. I mean, all of that is about buzzing headlines, but at the same time, most of those projects, they really mattered for local communities. Like, for example, we had a situation that because of the USAID fund freeze, in one of the villages in Ukraine, the reconstruction of the local windmill has been postponed and stopped. And this has become like a meme in Ukraine and so on and so forth. And everybody was like, oh my God, like that's how the taxpayers' money are spent, blah, 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 and all of that. But actually, when you look deeper into that story, you understand that this was a very good opportunity for that community, because the project of reconstruction of that was, I think, revolving around creating the public space with some resources for event hosting, I think, and something like that. So that windmill actually was intended to be the lifeline of the community. And not all people are understanding the importance of that, because it sounds ridiculous, but at the same time, the research and the case studies show that exactly those projects can make a community better and healthier. For example, some common theater play, and the government could not finance that in theory because of many different reasons. But it's exactly up to the foreign taxes who were financing those things. And that would be a great success story for those countries that invested into that. So when talking about all those different projects, we have to talk that actually the Ukrainian civil society has been really impacted heavily by the USAID freeze. In the NGO where I work also was one of those. We were working mostly on disinformation, research, and also building that capacity building and resilience against disinformation, and also building the environment and media landscape that is independent and free in Ukraine. But of course, we're also talking about many other smaller media outlets that unfortunately were shut down because of those because of those processes, because of those decisions. Many of them were the only good news outlet for many communities. Like there were so many small media outlets in small towns that were reliable and that were really independent thanks to that funding, but they unfortunately should have shut down because they unfortunately could not get any more money and could not pay salaries. Also, there were bigger projects that also fell under the impact of that. For example, there's a great initiative called Ukrainer, which is basically making different documentaries about various places in Ukraine and is doing many materials in as many languages as possible. And basically, the point is that they unfortunately also had to limit their activity because of that fund freeze. And I know many of those stories. For example, the NGO that I collaborate with frequently, Pan Europa Kyiv, is doing incredible projects regarding connecting together youngsters from Ukraine and youngsters from European countries, building those bridges and understanding and basically implementing very good projects for mutual understanding. And I think Ukraine is the best example that tells us about the importance of small steps, because usually we think that such activity is about something very big, very grand, and etc. But actually, Ukraine has many grassroots initiatives that are just helping solving minor issues on the ground, specifically in the context of war. And I think this is a good example of why small actions matter. And I think that the Ukrainian experience, especially those NGOs working in the battlefield areas, especially those NGOs that are working in temporarily occupied territories, I think and I hope that this will inspire people in other countries to change the situation around them by small steps. And I think that we should keep that in mind because sometimes I also have bad days, and sometimes I also think that everything is bad and I'm doing nothing good. But it's good to put things into perspective and, for example, see that there are people who are doing impossible things on the battlefield. Those that there are people who suffer more, and there are people who need your small steps, and that actually small steps really matter. So I hope that this will inspire the listeners to act in such small steps and to know that they are doing a great job with that.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you very much for mentioning some of the remarkable projects by the youth and even youth led organizations in Ukraine, but also at some other point where you have mentioned that some of the projects usually turned out to be so called projects, especially when these are some international investments back to the country in Ukraine. So I totally understand that sometimes this does not work out, but great power to those local, community leaders and projects which are trying their best to, uh, put efforts for their country and being withstanding the resilience and their spirit. So this is really remarkable. Even though while living in a very war zone area, I think that is a great job. So for our listeners, once again, we are in the new episode of Capital Youth Network podcast series. And today we are talking with Arthur, who is from Ukraine. And the title of the episode is Living Through War. A Ukrainian Youth Speaks Out. We have been discussing the general overview of the Ukraine war situation, the current challenges, and the future of the, Ukrainian. So now moving to another segment, which is of course a little bit different than the previous segment. This is about Ukraine's geopolitical importance. So, Arthur, I would like to have your, point of view about it, that Ukraine has been at the center of globe geopolitical in discussions. In your view, what makes Ukraine so important on the global stage?
I think Ukrainians will like that question a lot because the view of many Ukrainians, included in the field of geopolitical analysis about the global processes, is very Ukraine centric, which I'm not the biggest fan of, to be honest, but that's another conversation. I think it's important because it's a good, it will sound very detached a little bit from the reality and very cynical at times, which I apologize for because I also don't support that approach to the political analysis and I totally against it. But I think that to answer that question in the best way possible, I think we should look at it with no additional emotional connotation and look at it outside of the context of the constant suffering that people are going through in that case. I think that Ukraine currently is a big case study for why the theory and theoretical concepts of the international relations are not working. I think it's a good case study on why the political division lines that are traditional are kind of blurred nowadays. I think it's a good case study about the hybrid warfare and its importance. I hope people finally understood that now disinformation can kill as much or even more people as the bomb. And I wish this mentality would be engraved in the professional field that's related to that too. I think that Ukraine currently is also the case study of why it is important to talk with the world and why it is important to learn about what's going on in the world. Because as it being a very unprecedented case, it's also not an isolated case. And by all means, we live in a very interconnected world. And I think that there are some things that people can learn from the Ukrainian case. And the Ukraine could also learn from other cases, but also it's a good case study about how different media consumption is in each country of the world. And in fact, the current situation is showing that just doing, from the strategic communications point of view, doing one message and spreading it all across the globe is not working. That you need to know the context of every country. That, for example, you should know not to put, for example, Pakistan and India together in one sentence just for no reason. Or you should learn that, for example, you cannot call Armenia and Azerbaijan together at the same time. I think you know what I mean. So I really think that all those different things show why people should pay more attention to the situation that is happening in Ukraine. And also, I think it's, I would not say the reason, but it's in the center of all the changes that we are seeing now in geopolitics. And these changes are very unprecedented. And I think that if you are looking for answers why, you should look for Ukraine, but try to get those explanations at least from both sides. I'm not talking even about only from Ukraine, because Russia is the disinformation creator, but that's another conversation. At least from both sides. Because trust me, if you are interested in those things and you want to understand what is happening and why everything is happening, you can find those answers in Ukraine case. It will not be easy, but you will find those answers if you want and if you're interested. Because as I mentioned earlier, these are the reasons why these answers are hidden there.
Yeah, that is totally true. Like, fact checking is very important in such, cases. And of course, it is also true that some of the countries, being in conflict or being in war zones, they cannot be put together in one frame, because of course there could be either one side right and the other side wrong. Both cannot be right at the same time, especially when there's a war situation. So fact checking is very important. I think our audience could take a point from this as well. Thank you very much for being so brave and outspoken and explaining all these things in a very easy way for our audience as well to understand better. So how has international support, or the lack therefore, impacted Ukraine's fight for sovereignty and stability? Before you answer this question, also, I wanted to know your point of view as the citizen of Ukraine. How do you see the president of Ukraine being visiting from one country to another pledging for his country's peace and stability and being humiliated by some of the world's leaders as well. Like, how do you see this situation as well?
Wow, what an interesting question. Well, first and foremost, I personally would like to thank all people who support Ukraine, no matter where you are, no matter what your status is, no matter how you do it. I am personally grateful for your support because I think, as I talked earlier, small steps count, and this is exactly the example of why it matters. Because trust me, people in Ukraine appreciate even the smallest steps in that regard. So no matter where you are, no matter what your status is, and no matter what your way of supporting Ukraine is, thank you for supporting us. Because trust me, Ukrainians are the first to who want that war to finish. But again, it's not up to us, unfortunately, in that regard. And it's really important to understand that Ukraine has been attacked, despite what some people are trying to prove otherwise. If we talk about the international support in general, I think it has been very important, and Ukraine also showed that the world can come together if needed and when needed, if there's a leader to unite it. And unfortunately, it's a little bit saddening and heartbreaking looking at everything, what is going on with the support at that moment. If I'm speaking from just a human perspective, I appreciate every piece of support that we've got, starting from social media posts, finishing with weapons, and finishing like with money and whatever else is. However, if I speak as a professional in that case, the conversation becomes more complex and nuanced because I also share the same sentiment in my professional capacity. However, at the same time, there's a feeling of caution and there's a feeling of fear, which is understandable and natural. And the level of hesitation about going further in aid and support and help. And of course, there's the war fatigue. But I think that the whole notion of war fatigue nowadays has been very much demonized because I think it's a natural process and it happens sooner or later in every conflict, in every war. People are getting tired of it. And especially taking into account how different and how fast the world is nowadays. Of course, people are getting tired faster. And of course, you are also getting tired of it when you have your own issues to cope with. And when this is not your war. I know that some people are saying otherwise, that this is the whole Europe's war. And to some extent, it's true. However, when we narrow it down to the very micro level, and for example, when you are a citizen of Belgium, let's call it like that, or a citizen of Poland that has its own issues, that person is waking up. Let's imagine that this is a person who has a full family and kids. You need to cook up the breakfast for your kids and for yourself. You need to send them to school. You need to control their homework. You need to, if needed, and if there is, do some extracurriculars with them. Sometimes you need to do the medical checkup. Sometimes you have to do some bureaucracy stuff. You also have your job to do. You also have a million other obligations that you can think of. And at the end of the day, you're coming back home and you are turning up your news, no matter where, on the internet, on the TV, on the radio, sometimes in the newspaper, whatever. You are focusing first on what's important for your country, what is happening in your community, and then you go to other things, to other places. There are people who are not interested in what's going on in other countries because they have too many things to deal with on their own capacity. And I perfectly understand that. That's why I can't blame some people for not being interested, because I know that it hurts for many people in my country. But the hurt is different, and the pain is a very individual concept. And I cannot guilt trip other people. There are instances where, yeah, this is obvious, this is evident. And yeah, I think there are cases where more attention should be paid to. However, if we take it as an average and in the general term, we are dealing with many different ways, many different lifestyles, and many different worldviews. And we have to understand that. And of course, people are getting tired. So the support, or at least the support for this support, no matter how funny it sounds, of course, it's transforming currently because of that fatigue. However, I think the best way to cope with it is not to constantly complain about it and trying to change somebody's mind, and that's the slow transition to your second question. Because I think, as the person who has been covering the US politics for at least 3 years, at that point, I think more, I just can't count, I think, because it's so irregular, but nevertheless. The big issue in Ukrainian approach, not only to the United States politics, but also to politics everywhere else, is that constant desire to change somebody's mind. And I think it's counterproductive in our case, because it's not Ukraine's job to change somebody's minds, and it's not my job to do that. Ukraine can provide facts. Ukraine can tell its own story. Ukraine can make its story compelling and provide evidence and talk about it. However, it's up to the audience whether to receive that message or not. And that constant pursuit of changing somebody's mind, like I always hear in that regarding the situation in the United States, that people who call themselves experts in that field are saying, oh, we should do everything possible to change the minds of supporters for Donald Trump. But the point is that if you know your American politics, you understand that it's impossible. It's almost impossible to do that. That's the first thing. And the second thing, why bother if it's so inefficient? It's like you could use that power and use that stamina and use that energy for much more effect, and you could actually achieve what you want not just by, saying that, oh my God, we need to change somebody's mind, but actually just telling your story in the most compelling way possible and just trying to talk to different people and understand that there are different people and there are not only supporters of Ukraine and not only supporters of Russia per se, but there are people who really don't care. Yes, there are such people. And there are people who are just hesitant about the whole situation. And I think it's good to keep that in mind. And it's good to know your audience. And regarding the situation that happened in the United States, again, we have to move on from the mindset of changing somebody's mind because it's counterproductive. We need to focus on constructive approaches. We need to know what could be interesting for those people and what is their pain. Like, they're worried about the cost of living. They're worried about security concerns and etc. And Ukraine actually has good arguments regarding that. Like, for example, the current US administration is always talking about the new jobs in economy. Well, actually, the US support to Ukraine has created many jobs in the United States. And actually, the US help to Ukraine was benefiting the most, the United States the most, and not Ukraine, because these were the contracts implemented by the American companies on the territory of America. So basically, the American government was paying the American companies to manufacture the weapons and sell them and all of that. And basically, that's how it works, but nobody is talking about that. But actually, I think this is what we should be talking about, and not, we try to change somebody's mind because people are dying. I know that it might sound a little bit weird, but again, there's no other way to go around it. People are dying everywhere, unfortunately. And I think everybody knows that people are dying, and it's saddening. But at the same time, to make the most out of it, we need to be constructive in that regard. And I'm not talking about that in the context of, those crazy business people who are like, let's make money out of it, like that's it. No, I'm talking about the approach to the victory, as we call it, even though the victory is very different for different people. But nevertheless, when we evaluate the actions of my president, actually, at that moment, I feel a little bit more privileged than people from some other countries because at that moment, I can freely criticize my government and freely criticize my president, which is something that people not in all countries can afford. So I would like to point that out and say that I can do that without any serious consequences at that moment. What do I think about that? I really appreciate his actions and the fact that he stayed in the country during the first months of the war. However, there are different things regarding the good governance, and there are processes that I don't like. And that's the reason why I cannot fully support that person in that position. Because, for example, there are some statements, there are some actions that I don't align with. There are some indications of pressure against the opposition currently that I also cannot align with. I understand the accountability and everything else, but I cannot align with that being utilized for the political goals. And political purposes. I think that the whole, the whole approach of picking people for top positions is insanely wrong. There are pretty controversial, pretty scandalous people there, and I cannot stand fully by it. I know that some people in Ukraine have the approach of not talking about it until the war is not over. But actually, as I talked earlier, the modern warfare is different. And those exact things that I don't align with, they contribute to the war that we have currently. And unfortunately, they are delaying the success on that war. And I think we should find that balance, find that silver lining, and talk about that in a meaningful way, because it directly contributes to the developments on the battlefield. We don't have the war of the 20th century anymore, where, soldiers are far away and we learn what they did on the third day after the battle. The situation is different. We need to adapt to it. The modern warfare is different. And now the concepts of soft security, institutional resilience, and everything else are super important. Actually, there's one example that shows that in the best way possible. At the beginning of the full-scale invasion, a few regions in the north and the south were occupied because of the weak local governance, because those people who were mayors or governors there, they were ready to take the bribe and basically give up the whole area. And this is another indicator why politics matters during the war and why it's important to talk about such stuff. And I'm really grateful to all journalists, including the investigation ones, who are not stopping despite various precedents, who are talking about that. And I hope that we as the new generation, we will take all those lessons and we will finally understand how important all of that is. But I'm extremely grateful to those people who are still independent and still reported independently in such circumstances. And that's why I believe we have a good future. And we'll see how this goes. However, I would like to point out a very important thing. I don't think that the Russian claim about Mr. Zelensky being a president now illegally because his term is over, I don't believe that in that claim, and I don't support that claim, because the Ukrainian law states clear on that, and the Ukrainian law states clearly that in the emergency case and in the case of the martial law, in the case when the president's cadence, when the presidential term should have been over, it's prolonged automatically. It's the excerpt from the Constitution. It's according to the Ukrainian law, and everything else is wrong. I will set the record straight in that regard. Regarding everything else, I can criticize separate decisions, separate pieces, and we'll see what will happen next. But of course, I think we need to stay alert, and we need to live up to the title of the democratic country we are, because sometimes it's very difficult.
Oh, this was so powerful when you said that we cannot change someone's mind, and it is important to provide the true facts and the true evidence if we want to convey the message to the world. So I think this speaks a lot. And it shows that how patient you are, how resilient you are, and how confident you are being a Ukrainian, and how powerful you are, sending this message to the rest of the world. So this was so peaceful, but many like very, very powerful message to the rest of the youth across the world. So I believe I, as a youth as well, we stand with Ukraine, of course. We also have been, fact checking some of the things, been watching some news about Ukraine, watching videos, different, devastating moments as well. So I believe other youth, likewise mine, other youth as well from around the world are watching all these facts and evidence. And it is very much clear that what the youth says in the end, it is also available on the social media as well, in the form of social media, like how they are responding and with whom they stand. I hope that Ukraine and the people of Ukraine should have a better future with peace and prosperity in the end. And I'm so, glad and appreciate your confidence, especially like how passionate you are while answering all these questions with so much research, analysis, and some other points as well, like your own point of view. Thank you very much once again, Arthur, for telling all these facts to our audience. And I would like to ask you, I was just, wondering, like, how do you see the future of Ukraine in the next 10 to 20 years? How you would like to imagine Ukraine in 10 years or maybe in next 20 years? What is your hope?
I hope we'll be able to implement that. And first of all, thank you for all your kind comments. I really appreciate that. I really hope that we'll be able to put it to life, even though it'll be very difficult. But I think that I hope in 10 years, Ukraine will be fully resilient, even more resilient than it is now, that it will be a very well-developed European country with even more robust civil society, with young people taking the lead in many avenues and having real opportunities to change the country. I hope that Ukraine in 10 years will have no hatred and will have mutual respect to people who are living in that country, no matter what are they thinking. I hope that in 10 years, the Ukrainian mindset to politics will change and will focus on action. I hope that Ukraine will be more alert regarding the security situation and that it will not fall into Russian traps again. I hope that we all, together with Ukraine, will have a stable, peaceful, and prosperous future where we could focus on solutions instead of patching those different crises that are appearing all across the globe just because of the old ways we were doing things. And I hope that Ukraine will be an example of how to recover after the conflict in the most meaningful and most efficient way possible, which could inspire also many other countries. And I really think on that note, in that question, I really hope that Ukraine will be even more inspiring to other people. I think it already is. But I hope it will be even more inspiring for many, many, many people across the globe. And it will be a good place to communicate with people from different countries and exchange those different experiences and different ideas and putting them into perspective.
Yeah, that is great. We also wish a very good luck to Ukraine, and we also want to see Ukraine as a progressing country, a country where people should have no more fear, a country where children should have access to education, a very peaceful place to live, enjoy their childhood as well, till their teenage, and then pursuing their studies in different universities, and also attaining some of the different exchange programs as well, as you have just mentioned. So I believe this is a great future for Ukraine, with hope, with resilience, and with passion. And we salute the youth of Ukraine because they have so much to say about their country. They still have patience, they still have resilience. And I mean, I really admire their patience when they speak about their country's situation, the way they talk about some facts, evidence, and the way, they talk with so much resilience and peace and prosperity. I think this is the core strength of the youth of the Ukraine. And you, Arthur, as the ambassador of your country, you have been in some other part of the world as well, and been working with some international organizations, and also your current projects, which you have just mentioned in the beginning. I believe more power to you, and we wish you good luck in the future. And through this platform, once again, I would give you the open floor that if you can share the message to the rest of the youth, to the world, like what you want to say as a final message, and what you want to convey to the rest of the world about either Ukraine or maybe about the youth of Ukraine. What is your final maybe request, or maybe, humble message, or maybe the message of love and prosperity you want to give to the rest of the world in the final, round? Yeah.
First of all, thank you for your words, and good luck also to you personally and to your country also, because I think we're all in this together, after all, in this very challenging world. And my final message will be exactly about the challenging world. I feel your pain. I feel the pain of those people who are listening to that. I know that there are so many different problems across the globe, and everybody has their own issues to deal with. And that's okay. However, I ask you, if you have free time and if you are really interested, look for more stories from Ukrainian youth. There are many articles, many different videos, a lot of things to explore this country and explore its youth and their activities. Talk more with Ukrainian voices. It's definitely very enriching talking to them. And I hope that these stories will motivate you to act and to move on, to do things even better, than we are doing now. And every comment you write, every share you do with the content about Ukraine, every cent you donate for Ukraine and its cause, every different way you support our country matters. So trust me, even if you do the small step, it will help those people actually go through this better and actually be stronger. So whenever you read something about Ukraine or whenever you do something related to it, remember about that. And remember that we also feel your pain and we also understand how difficult current world is. So let's focus on unity and let's focus on how we can go through this together and how Ukrainian experience can help you to go through this in a better way. I hope this leaves you in peace, and I hope that this inspires you for more. And I'm really grateful for this opportunity to talk about that topic today.
Yeah, thank you very much. We also wish a very prosper and peaceful Ukraine, of course. And thank you so much for sharing your experiences and insights with us today. Your voice is a testament to the resilience of Ukraine's youth, and we truly appreciate your time. Thank you to our listeners as well. Thank you for tuning in. And remember, like Cactil is a solely platform which, encourages inclusivity, equity, and equality. While through these podcast episodes, we give inclusive opportunities to the youth from across the world to speak about their country's issues and to also speak about different youth challenges from across the world. We believe youth from different countries are the true ambassador of their countries and as well as their representatives. So their voices matters, and of course their voices are genuine, natural, and they must be heard. So today Artur was one of those examples. Thank you very much, Artur, as well as to the listeners, our audience. For the next episode, please tune in with the Cactil World Youth Network podcast series. And until then, take care.